Welcome back to The Right Perspective. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a book you all sent in. It's called The Trump Legacy, How Donald J. Trump Changed America by Bill Vincent. It's really quite a fascinating look at how Trump's presidency shook things up.
It really is. And Vincent does a great job connecting the dots. You can see how Trump's actions had this ripple effect across all these different areas.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Trump's entry into politics was pretty unconventional, to say the least. Businessman and reality TV star. He wasn't exactly what people pictured when they thought about Mr. President.
Right. And, Vincent points out how the political establishment just totally underestimated him.
Totally.
They dismissed him as a sideshow. But he was tapping into something much more powerful with voters, the people who felt ignored and left behind by the system.
Yeah, and his campaign was like nothing we'd seen before. Unfiltered on social media.
Right.
Not afraid to just throw out nicknames for his opponents. Low energy Jeb,
Yeah.
anyone.
Right.
And he really wasn't afraid to talk about the issues that other politicians just completely avoided, like immigration and trade deals.
Yeah, those rallies were something else, too. Vincent describes them as part political event and part rock concert.
Wow.
Trump connected with people on this visceral level. And that Make America Great Again slogan really resonated. It wasn't just a slogan, it was this promise to bring back a time when America felt strong and prosperous.
Yeah, I can see that. So Vincent is arguing that this outsider status and this unconventional approach, those were key to Trump's appeal. He wasn't part of the swamp, as he called it.
Right.
And that resonated with voters
Absolutely.
who were just tired of business as usual in Washington.
Exactly. And this whole drain the swamp mentality, it carried over into his policies, especially when it came to trade.
So let's talk about America first. This was a major shift in U.S. policy, right? Trump really shook things up on the global stage.
He did, and Vincent argues that this was a necessary correction. Previous administrations had been too willing to enter into trade deals that weren't in America's best interest.
Right. The book focuses specifically on NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And Trump renegotiated that into the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement.
Yes, and one of the key changes in the USMCA that Vincent highlights is this provision that requires 75% of a car's components to be manufactured in North America to qualify for zero tariffs.
Interesting.
This was a huge win for American auto workers and a direct result of Trump's tough negotiating tactics.
Wow, so it wasn't just talk. These were real concrete changes that impacted industries and workers. It's interesting how Vincent connects these trade deals to the everyday lives of Americans.
He does a great job showing the real-world impact of these policies. And it wasn't just NAFTA. Trump also took on China and the European Union, using tariffs as leverage to try and get better deals for American businesses and workers.
This approach was definitely controversial. But Vincent argues that it forced other countries to take America more seriously at the negotiating table. He wasn't afraid to walk away from a deal if he felt it wasn't fair.
It was a major shift from the more conciliatory approach of previous presidents.
This deep dive is brought to you by the Right Perspective channel. If you are enjoying the episode, please like and subscribe. Now, another area where Trump's America First philosophy really came into play was national security. He made it clear from the start that he was going to prioritize America's strength
Absolutely.
and security on the global stage.
And one of the first things he did was significantly increase military spending.
Right.
Vincent points out that Trump saw this as essential to restoring America's military dominance and deterring adversaries like China and Russia.
The book highlights how Trump increased the defense budget by billions of dollars, investing in new equipment, modernizing weapon systems,
Yeah.
and boosting troop levels.
And it wasn't just about spending money. Trump also articulated what he called a peace through strength doctrine, arguing that a strong military was the best way to prevent conflict.
So he believed that projecting strength would make America's enemies think twice before challenging us.
Exactly. And this philosophy influenced everything, from his approach to NATO to his dealings with North Korea and Iran.
Speaking of NATO, Trump was pretty critical of the alliance, wasn't he? He repeatedly called on member countries to increase their defense spending, arguing that they weren't pulling their weight.
He did, and while this ruffled some feathers, Vincent points out that it actually led to several NATO members increasing their contributions. So you could argue that Trump's tough stance actually strengthened the alliance in the long run.
Yeah, it's fascinating how he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even with long-standing alliances. He was willing to shake things up if he felt it was in America's best interest.
That's a good point. And this willingness to challenge conventional thinking was also evident in his approach to the Middle East.
Let's talk about the Abraham Accords. This was a major foreign policy achievement, right?
It was a historic breakthrough. Under Trump's leadership, Israel normalized relations with several Arab nations, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco.
The book details how these agreements were driven by shared security concerns, particularly the threat from Iran, as well as the potential for economic cooperation.
And Vincent highlights the role of Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, who was instrumental in brokering these deals. It was a major diplomatic win for the Trump administration.
And it really shifted the dynamics in the Middle East. These accords have the potential to reshape the region for years to come.
Absolutely. They opened up new possibilities for cooperation and dialogue, and they showed that peace was possible, even in a region long plagued by conflict.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Trump's domestic policies. One of the most significant was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017.
This was a cornerstone of Trump's economic agenda. Vincent argues that by slashing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, Trump made American businesses more competitive globally, which led to investment and job growth.
The book also highlights how the tax cuts, combined with deregulation, particularly in the energy sector, helped to fuel a period of economic growth. Unemployment rates reached historic lows, and the stock market soared.
It's interesting how Vincent connects Trump's business background to his approach to economic policy. He took a very pragmatic, results-oriented approach, focusing on policies that he believed would boost growth and create jobs.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge conventional economic thinking. For example, he took a very different approach to trade, as we've already discussed, using tariffs and other measures to protect American industries and workers.
Right, and while this was controversial, Vincent argues that it ultimately benefited the American economy by forcing other countries to negotiate fairer trade deals.
The book also touches on Trump's efforts to address infrastructure. He talked a lot about the need to rebuild America's roads, bridges, and airports, but he faced a lot of resistance in Congress.
He did. Infrastructure was a major focus of his campaign, and he saw it as a way to create jobs and boost the economy. But it was a tough sell politically, and he wasn't able to get much done in this area.
Now let's talk about an issue that was central to Trump's presidency: immigration. He campaigned on a promise to build a wall on the southern border and take a much tougher stance on illegal immigration.
This was a defining issue for Trump, and it really resonated with his base. Vincent explains how Trump tapped into a sense of frustration among many Americans who felt that the government wasn't doing enough to control the border and enforce immigration laws.
The wall became a symbol of his commitment to border security, and it was a constant source of controversy throughout his presidency.
It was. And it wasn't just the wall. Trump also implemented a travel ban on citizens from several predominantly Muslim countries, which sparked protests and legal challenges.
Vincent argues that while these policies were controversial, they were popular with Trump supporters who saw them as necessary steps to protect national security and American jobs.
He also points out that Trump's focus on immigration enforcement led to a significant increase in deportations and a crackdown on sanctuary cities.
And remember, his efforts to end DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. That was a very contentious issue.
DACA had allowed undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. as children to stay and work legally. Trump argued that the program was unconstitutional and that he was simply enforcing the law.
But his critic argued that he was heartlessly targeting young people who would know no other home than America.
It was a very divisive issue, and it illustrated the deep partisan divide over immigration policy.
This deep dive is brought to you by the Right Perspective channel. If you are enjoying the episode, please like and subscribe. Now let's move on to an area where Trump had a profound and lasting impact: the judiciary.
This is where we really see the long-term legacy of the Trump presidency taking shape. He appointed 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, fundamentally shifting the balance of the court.
And these appointments will continue to shape American law for decades to come. Vincent argues that Trump's judicial appointments were a major victory for the conservative legal movement, which had been working for years to reshape the judiciary.
He points out that Trump worked closely with the Federalist Society, a conservative legal organization, to identify and vet potential nominees.
And these appointments have already had a significant impact on a number of key legal issues, including abortion, gun rights, and religious liberty.
It's interesting how Vincent frames this as a long-term strategy. He argues that Trump saw the courts as a way to cement his legacy and ensure that his policies would continue to be upheld even after he left office.
And it's a strategy that's likely to have a profound impact on American society for many years to come.
Absolutely. These appointments are perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Trump presidency.
Another area where Trump really connected with his base was his defense of religious freedom. He saw himself as a champion of religious groups, particularly conservative Christians, who he felt were under attack by secular forces.
And he took concrete steps to support this view. Vincent details how Trump rolled back the Johnson Amendment, which had restricted political activity by churches and other tax-exempt organizations.
This was a big win for his evangelical supporters, who saw it as a restoration of their First Amendment rights.
He also appointed conservative judges who were sympathetic to religious freedom claims, and he took a strong stance in favor of religious liberty in international forums.
Vincent argues that Trump's focus on religious freedom was a key part of his appeal to his base, and it's an issue that continues to resonate with conservatives today.
It's a powerful theme that runs throughout his presidency.
Now, no discussion of the Trump legacy would be complete without talking about his response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was an unprecedented challenge, and it tested his leadership in ways that no one could have anticipated.
It was a defining moment of his presidency, and it exposed both his strengths and his weaknesses. Vincent details how Trump initially downplayed the severity of the virus, which drew criticism from public health experts.
But he also highlights how Trump took decisive action to try to contain the spread of the virus, including declaring a national emergency and implementing travel restrictions.
He also pushed for the rapid development of a vaccine, launching Operation Warp Speed, which brought together the government and private sector to accelerate the process.
And while the pandemic had a devastating impact on the economy, Vincent credits Trump with pushing for the passage of the CARES Act, a massive economic stimulus package that provided relief to businesses and individuals.
He also points out that Trump was eager to reopen the economy as quickly as possible, even as the virus continued to spread.
This was a controversial decision, with some arguing that he was prioritizing the economy over public health.
But Vincent argues that Trump was trying to balance competing priorities, recognizing the devastating economic impact of lockdowns and the need to get people back to work.
It was a difficult situation with no easy answers. And Trump's handling of the pandemic is likely to be debated for years to come.
Absolutely. It was a defining moment of his presidency, and it had a profound impact on the country.
And of course, we can't talk about the Trump legacy without talking about the 2020 election, one of the most contentious elections in American history. It really solidified the emergence of Trumpism as a political force.
Yeah, Vincent dedicates a big chunk of the book to the 2020 election and its aftermath. He sets the stage, describing the deep political divisions in the country, the unprecedented challenges posed by the pandemic, and the expansion of mail-in voting. It was a perfect storm of factors that led to the intensity and the controversy.
And then there were the legal challenges, the recounts, Trump's refusal to concede. It was a period of intense uncertainty and political turmoil.
Vincent doesn't shy away from these controversies at all. He lays out the arguments on both sides. He acknowledges the concerns about election integrity, but he also emphasizes that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. That would have changed the outcome.
What's interesting is how Vincent frames the 2020 election as a turning point. Regardless of who won, he argues that it solidified the birth of Trumpism as a political movement that transcends Trump himself.
That's a key takeaway from the book, for sure. Vincent sees Trumpism as something bigger than just one person. It's rooted in populism, nationalism, economic protectionism, and a rejection of the political establishment.
And he believes that this movement will continue to shape American politics for years to come.
He does. He argues that Trump tapped into this deep well of frustration and resentment among a segment of the American population, those who felt ignored and left behind by the political elite. These voters felt that the system was rigged against them, that their voices weren't being heard.
And Trump gave them a voice. He spoke directly to their concerns, and he promised to shake things up.
He did shake things up, whether you agree with his policies or not. There's no denying that Trump's presidency was transformative.
It really was. So Vincent identifies several key elements of Trumpism that he thinks will continue to influence the Republican Party and American politics more broadly. Right. One is this idea of America first, this focus on putting American interests above all else.
Right, and this shows up in everything, from trade policy to foreign policy to immigration.
Another key element is this deep distrust of the political establishment, the so-called deep state and the media.
Trump constantly railed against the fake news media, and he accused his opponents of being corrupt and just out of touch with ordinary Americans.
And this resonated with a lot of people. those who felt that the system was rigged against them.
Vincent also points out that Trumpism is fueled by a sense of cultural anxiety, this fear that traditional American values are being eroded by things like globalization, immigration, and political correctness.
Trump tapped into this fear,
Hmm.
and he promised to restore America to its former glory, to make America great again.
And that message resonated with a lot of voters who felt that America was losing its way.
So what's the legacy of Trumpism? Vincent argues that it's too early to say for sure.
He's right. We're still too close to fully assess the long-term impact. But he does believe that Trumpism has fundamentally changed the Republican Party and reshaped the political landscape in ways that will be felt for years to come.
It's a fascinating and thought-provoking analysis.
It really is. And it highlights the enduring power of populism and the importance of understanding the forces that are shaping American politics today.
This deep dive is brought to you by the Right Perspective channel. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to keep thinking critically, keep exploring different perspectives, and keep asking those important questions.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for listening to the Right Perspective channel.